Guys, we are going back to the retirement home for this one. This is the ranking UFC fighters by UNC status tier list, and all the fighters on this tier list have achieved UNC status in one way or another, but some have truly transcended it. Before we begin, let me explain the rules and what each tier means. The rules here are going to be pretty simple. Nobody below the age of 35 qualifies for UNC status. Active UFC fighters only, and we are ranking strictly based on these fighters' veteran aura, whether they're a crafty vet, shout out Flukas Glazy, RIP, rest in retirement, more like, and their success within their division despite their accumulated mileage and age. We are also ranking based on how washed they are. The more washed they are, the lower on the tier list they belong. If they are just a walking body bag, a motherfucking can, they belong in the F tier. It's that simple, guys. Next, the tiers themselves are going to be a little interesting. And so starting with the S tier, this is for unks who are elite but undeniably old. The S tier unks are still at the top of their division, and while they are not in their prime anymore, they still have maintained at a minimum contender status within their division. These guys might have had to evolve their style. They might rely on different attributes such as cardio or just straight up outcrafting these young bucks. He's working the leg kick, man. Oh my lord. That kind of craftiness within their game. And so those are our S tier fighters. For the A tier fighters, the A tier unks, let's think of fighters who have achieved also that crafty veteran status, but these guys, they're not really contenders anymore. They're not super likely to beat a contender anymore. These guys can still beat up on prospects, and they're still very dangerous, but they're not completely elite. And I would consider a lot of these guys gatekeepers of their divisions, and if you beat them, it's a pretty meaningful win on your resume, and the unks themselves can still collect meaningful wins on their resume as even though they're probably not going to be champ. For the B tier, this is what I would consider the functional unk status. These are the unks that are putting belt to ass on mostly unranked jobbers. They can still beat up most of the roster. And beating a B tier unk still means something at this point in their career. It's usually a stepping stone for a ranked fight, or it might get you a ranking if you beat a B tier unk. But these guys are, definitely a step below the A tier. And this leads us into the next tier. I think this is most of the unks in this list is the C tier. These unks are fully washed at this point, but they're still respected. Their body is clearly declining. The speed and reactions are mostly gone. The chins are usually questionable, but the aura is still there. And most importantly, these guys still have a chance at winning fights. As you'll see with some of the DNF tier, these guys really don't have a chance at winning fights, especially if they're fighting other unks or just absolute cans. Then in the C tier, very doable for the unks. An example of a C tier who's no longer active, a C tier unk, before they retired was kind of like a Robbie Lawler, someone who was able to. He retired on a dub against Nico Price. He was also able to beat an equally washed Nick Diaz before he retired while he was in his unk status. But he was basically losing to anyone else who still had a serious MMA career at that point. And so that's our C tier unks. Moving on to our D tier unks. D tier unks are fighters who are literally one fight away from retirement, in my opinion. These guys have basically nothing left in the gas tank, and even planning a retirement fight for them is difficult for the UFC because they lose to pretty much anyone on the roster with a recognizable name. Yes, could you match him up with a complete nobody that we've never heard of who is from the regional scene and they get a win? Yeah, but anyone with a recognizable name, it's pretty difficult to find someone they can win against these D tier unks. Um, and so yeah, these D tier unks are still technically active, but not for long, in my opinion. Moving on to the F tier. The F tier unks are on the roster in spirit only, in name only. These guys are so fucking old and washed that they might not even get a retirement fight. Either the UFC might just straight up cut him before they get a retirement fight, or they might pull a Dominic Cruz and I don't know, tear their shoulder for like the 15th time or whatever, or the injuries basically accumulate too much and they have to call it quits. Um, these are the truly bottom of the barrel when it comes to unks. And so yeah, those are our tiers, those are our rules. Let's go ahead and get started. And so with our first unk, we have Derek Lewis. And so Derek Lewis, he is the quintessential unk. He in his last five, I think, is 3-2. And I think as the quintessential unk, he's nothing special, but he belongs in that solid B tier. Um, for his whole career, he's been beating up on guys who, you know, really aren't going to be getting a title shot anytime soon. It may be earlier in his career if you beat Derek Lewis, you get a title shot. But he's kind of at that point where he's just feeding on lower level prospects and unranked fighters. And he's been on a little 2-fight winning streak right now. I think he knocked out Rodrigo Nascimento, and he knocked out Talison Teixeira. Those are two great unk wins. I also think Derek Lewis has, you know, maxed out unk aura. The way he speaks, the way you could totally see this dude at the barbecue making inappropriate jokes, and your mom or your dad telling him to stop in front of your little cousin or your little brother or whatever. And so I think he's the perfect way to start this tier list as the litmus test for what a B tier unk, what a not a perfect unk, but just the prototypical unk should be in the UFC. Moving on next, we have our next unk. You guessed it, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And so I'm gonna put him in the C tier actually, and some people are gonna be mad at me because of his personality instead of his actual unk status. Um, and so I would say, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, I think you could argue he's actually in the D tier potentially. He's literally won, I think he's like 1-5 in his last six, or and I know for a fact he's 1-4 in his last five. The only thing that I'll give him, the only reason I'm not ranking him much lower, is because the fighters he's losing to are are ranked fighters, and not only that, but they're usually getting close to the top five within their division. And so it would be disrespectful to put our boy Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I think he's like 41 or 42 fighting these guys. He had that fight against Kevin Holland. He's what we would consider the funkle, the nice uncle. And so he belongs solidly in the D tier, or the C tier, I mean. And so moving on, next. This next one is a fan favorite. A lot of us love him, and that is Alexander Volkanovski. Old Man Volk at the press conference. That was, I think, the debut of Uncle Volk, Unk Status Volk. And so let's put him right here in the S tier. That's where I think he belongs. Why is he in the S tier, you might be asking? It's pretty simple. He is the current champ in the featherweight division. It is that simple. He's also, his record is mint, honestly. I know he's lost to Ilya Taporia and Islam Makhachev. Those are his only major losses in the last, I think, like decade or something like that. He he belongs here. I think he clears out most of his division. I think he's going to beat Diego Lopez again and right off into the sunset. The ultimate unk. If there could be a go unk, it would be him. It's not John Jones. And I know John Jones doesn't belong in this list because he's not active. He never really was. But if it was a go unk list, I think Volkanovski would top out John Jones, in my opinion, because what Volkanovski's been able to accomplish in a lower weight division as well, breaking the 35 plus curse, very impressive. He is the quintessential S tier unk. And so let's move on to the next unk that we got. This one, this one's elite ball knowledge. I know he's not super, I wouldn't say a hardcore fan's fantasy or anything, but I don't think every casual is going to know about this guy, especially his incredible unk status. But this guy, he's been Nicholas Dalby. I'll just say it. He's been unk maxing for such a long time, It's genuinely impressive. I would have to put him, unfortunately, because of his recent, wins and losses, I might have to put him in the C tier, but he defeated Khabib's little prodigy, his little butt buddy, and in that fight recently. When was that? Literally like on a month ago. And so I have to put him in the B tier because of that. But before that, yes, he lost to Randy Brown. Yes, he lost to Renat Fakhrinidov. I thought both those fights were pretty close, especially against Renat. I thought he actually beat Renat. Before that, though, he beat Gabriel Bonfim and Muslim Salikov, and I think those are both solid wins. We will see how this Saeed, I can't even pronounce that, Tazakmanov win ages. But Dalby, the thing about him is he's been active in his old age. He's been collecting wins, and he's been doing it for a very, very long time in the UFC. He actually came to the UFC as an unk already, so this dude's been unk maxing for a long time, guys. And I think he belongs in the B tier with Derek Lewis here because the wins he does have, yes, they're impressive, but none of those guys are really ranked at this point. So, you're not fighting him to get a ranking. You're not fighting him, you know, to get a top 5 or title shot. So he's not really a contender. He's not really a prospect. I think the guys who fight him and beat him can become prospects and contenders, and so that's why he's in the B tier. Moving on next to Tim Elliott. So let me pull him out. Oops, I kind of announced his name without pulling him out. But we got Tim Elliott, who, you know, I think he's like 4-2, 5-1, he's 4-1, 5-2 in his last 5 or 6. I don't know why I put it like that. That was a fucking retarded way to putting it. Um, that being said, though, I love how he looks home. He almost looks like a Dagestani who doesn't shave like who doesn't shave the mustache, and doesn't get the haircuts. But I'm putting him in the A tier. I think his win over Kaya Sakura, although it probably is going to age pretty terribly, or maybe not terribly considering the rankings at the time. Yeah, no, that's a great win, guys. But beyond that, his only loss recently in the UFC as an unk is against Muhammad Makayev, who I think a lot of people considered a dark horse within the division. And he also was able to keep that fight. He had some crafty vet scrambles. He showed his experience off. It was a very close fight. Um, and so Tim Elliott, I think what puts him solidly in the A tier is his style and his adaptability. He's always had that herky jerky weird style, kind of overstimulating his opponent. But he's been able to maintain that into his old age, despite the decreasing speed, the decreasing reaction time. And if you beat Tim Elliott, like I think at this point in the rankings, I don't know what ranking he's at specifically. I don't remember off the top of my head. That's my bad, but it puts you pretty close to a title shot, and so you have to respect him in the A tier. And this is where I'm going to leave him. And so moving on next, this next guy, guys, I'm going to be honest, is an absolute jobber. Um, we're not going to talk about him very long. Court McGee belongs in the fucking F tier, guys. I know there's going to be some hardcores out there saying, "Well, he's been here for a long." Most of these guys have been here for a long time. It doesn't matter to me. His only win in the last like 3 or 4 years is fucking Tim Means. And Tim Dirty Bird I love Dirty Bird. He's like a guilty pleasure of mine, but he's not. Neither the both those guys are at the bottom of their division. And beyond that, Court McGee, I think my grandfather, he reminds me of my grandfather. He fights like old people fuck, it's absolutely disgusting. And I think he's one of those guys who's genuinely under jeopardy of either getting his contract cut or just like, I don't know, tearing his C3 vertebrae, not tearing it, I don't know, crushing it somehow and being relegated to becoming like a pad holder for whatever team he trains at, American Top Team or whatever the fuck. So yeah, Court McGee, he's an example of the F tier. Casuals don't give a shit about him. I'm sorry, he doesn't have much of a legacy, and his record's terrible. His record as an unk is still terrible. I literally don't think he can beat anyone in his division right now, and so that's where he belongs. Our next unk. This guy has been rising up through the division, and this is Michael Venom Page, and he belongs right next to Tim Elliott, right there in the A tier. Why does he belong in the A tier? People are probably asking me. He's only been in the UFC for a very short amount of time. I thought Unks had to be veterans. Yes and no. First, I would argue that after 5 fights, MVP is a veteran. Or no, 4 fights, my bad. I'm sorry. After 4 fights, he could be considered a veteran. He's not on his contract anymore. And when you have that much MMA experience, especially with Bellator, where it's not UFC level experience, but it's high level MMA experience. Um, but it's more so the guys he's beating and how he's beating them. His only loss is against someone who I think is challenging for the belt next. If it's not Kamaru Usman, Ian Machado Gary, and in that fight, he forced Ian Machado Gary to become a wrestler. His striking could potentially be, I'm not even kidding you guys, top 2 to 3 in either the welterweight or middleweight division. I'm actually pretty curious to see what happens to Michael Venom Page in the welterweight division because there's a lot of exciting strikers there. I think his grappling is just good enough to hold off some of the grappling threat that those strikers could pose because we know for a fact MVP does not pose a striking threat. But I just really think it's really interesting how MVP, despite having a style that relies on speed and reaction time and explosiveness, has been able to maintain such a high level in the UFC, especially when most people thought when he came over that he would, yes, have success, but not to the level he's had, and not in 2 weight classes. And so Michael Venom Page, he is borderline an S tier. If he had, I'd say, one more marquee victory against a ranked opponent in either middleweight or welterweight, a top, I'd say, 10 opponent, he's going in the S tier, guys. And so keep your eyes out for MVP. This Unk is for real. I think he just had a kid or just got married too, so that adds to the Unk status. But for now, he belongs in the A tier with our boy Tim Elliott there. So moving on to the next fighter, we got Michael Johnson. I bet you this is elite ball knowledge. You guys weren't expecting this guy. And when I break this down for y'all, you guys are gonna you're gonna understand it. Nope, he's A tier. He's he's no, he's B tier. He's B tier. Just because of the level of opponents, I don't think he's on the same level of Michael Venom Page. I couldn't claim that. But let me read you Michael Johnson's last five. Daniel Zellhuber win. He beats him by decision, I'm pretty sure. Ottoman Azatar beats him by brutal knockout. Darius Flowers beats him by decision, loses to Diego Ferreira. I think I can't remember if that was like a TKO or something, but and then of decision against Mark Diakese, who's no longer in the UFC, which isn't that impressive of a victory, but still somewhat impressive because Mark has had some success in Bellator and he was always a pretty, I think a good, I guess, I don't want to say gatekeeper because he wasn't, what gate was he keeping? But he was, if you could beat Mark Diakese, you were in the top half of your division, if that makes sense. Um, but the Daniel Zellhuber win has definitely escalated Michael Johnson into the B tier. Michael Johnson has always been that fighter. I think people make memes about where it's like, he's gonna beat Dustin Poirier, but then he'll lose to like, my grandma or your plumber or my drug dealer or whatever. Um, but he's strung together a 3-fight winning streak recently, with the most recent victory being against a legitimate prospect. I won't say a contender, so that's why I can't put him in the A tier. But that victory over Daniel Zellhuber, that puts him solidly in the B tier. And somehow, just like Michael Venom Page, the one thing that Michael Johnson has been able to maintain is just like an absolutely vicious and insane hand speed. And so as an unk, for some of the when we're doing some of these rankings, we do have to think about some of the attributes that they have kept or have been able to, I guess, implement better. So, if they have cardio like Nicholas Dalby, the way he implements that is what makes him an unk. There's fighters who have good cardio who fail to implement that as the main, I guess, aspect of their game plan the older they get. Nicholas Dalby knows he kind of has to be a Dagestani grapple fucker now, a crotch sniffer because of his cardio. He has to clinch up, he has to grapple. Michael Johnson is the same. He knows he's just going to try and box with you. If he needs to, he can take it to the wrestling, whether that's panic wrestling when he gets hurt, because he does get hurt often, I'm not going to lie. Or if he feels like he can find success and hold you down, he does it. And so I think he has a pretty good fight IQ. His wins are there, and he belongs in the B tier. Moving on to our next fighter, we got a UFC legend, Cub Swanson. That being said, I have to put him in the C tier, guys. And before you say something, this is and that's the hard part about this list, guys. Is a lot. Unk is not a negative word. Most of these guys, we love them as fighters. We love their careers. They're just at a point where it's very rare for them to find success. And a lot of guys are gonna hate on me for this, but I think Cub Swanson belongs in the C tier. And I know guys are gonna say, well, what's the difference between him and Derek Lewis and Nicholas Dalby and Michael Johnson? And I'd say the difference is Cub Swanson is holding prospects back when he beats them. Otherwise, he's losing to the likes of Andre Philly. And it's that simple. I mean, his most recent win against Billy Quarantillo, decent win, don't get me wrong, but I had Billy Quarantillo winning that fight, to be completely honest with you. Yeah, I said it. I know. And losing to Andre Philly, honestly, to me is not a great look. I think they're both journeymen at this point. And I don't think, I think, one of the prerequisites we set for the B tier is that, usually these guys are if you're fighting, if you beat them, you're usually gonna either get a ranked opponent next, or when you beat them, you'll get that ranking somewhere outside of the top 10. And you're kind of considered a prospect. And so I don't think that's what you are if you beat Cub Swanson at this point. I think there's fighters who, if because of their resume, because of the way they beat Cub Swanson, they could be considered a prospect for beating him. But I don't think beating Cub Swanson alone means anything at this point too much in the career anymore. And so yeah, he belongs in the C tier. Moving on, and this one's painful, guy. And I'm about to. Oh my god, I can't believe I had to give a trigger warning for Cub Swanson. This next one's gonna piss off a lot of guys. Jan Blachowicz, and I'm putting him. We left this spot open for him. I gotta put Jan. If he'll fucking there we go in the D tier. And I know you guys are gonna be mad at me, but you have to hear me out. You have to hear this out. He is on a 4-fight no winning streak. Not a loss streak, but just not winning streak, if that makes sense. His last 4 goes draw to Bogdan Guskov, lost to Carlos Ulberg, lost to Alex Pereira, draw to Magomed Ankalaev, and then that 5th fight, win against Alexander Rakic. Here's my arguments for why he belongs in the D tier. First of all, inactivity. Those 5 fights I just described, all of them have happened since 2022. So we're about to hit 2026, guys. That's 1.2 fights a year. 1.25 fights a year is not enough. It's not enough, guys. It's not enough. And he's had nothing but injuries at this point, and that's part of the contribution to why he's so inactive. But his inactivity, we have to say something about that. And beyond that, I think he's overranked. And I think he's been overranked. People will sit there and say, well, his losses to Alex Pereira and Carlos Ulberg were close. And besides that, he's going to draw with the champ, the former champ Magomed, and Bogdan Guskov, an up-and-coming knockout artist. And I see where you're coming from, but he hasn't had a win in what, 4 years almost? 4 years almost, guys. Guys, if and you have to also realize this is light heavyweight where most of the fighters are older. Most of the fighters are 30 plus in the rankings. A lot of the fighters in the rankings are 35 plus, just like Jan. Was Alex Pereira young when he fought Jan Blachowicz? No. Was Alexander Rakic particularly young? No. I'll give it that Magomed and Carlos Ulberg and Bogdan are probably in their primes, but what has Jan really done to deserve this legendary Polish power status? I think he's kind of an aura merchant here. I think he's a rank squatter, and I think because of that, he belongs in the D tier solidly. Sue me. Sue me. Sue me, sue me, sue me, sue me. I don't care. Jan to me is such an overrated fighter. I get His legacy is great. I understand that, but since basically since his fights against, I guess I would say Izzy, and shortly after when he held the belt, but when he lost the belt and came back, I don't think he was the same fighter. I don't. And I don't think he has the resume to sit there and claim in the twilight of his career anything plus a D plus unk. Anyways, it's too long on him. Moving on to a true unk legend, Kamaru Usman. And I know what people are gonna say because ironically, he's actually pretty similar to Jan, where he's having close fights, there's inactivity. But the reason I have to put Kamaru Usman in the S tier is this simple, guys. He is in title contention. And he passes the eyeball test. It's that simple, guys. What are his most recent fights? Let's look at his most recent win, Joaquin Buckley. Pretty damn good performance. He outgrappled the Buck. He damaged the Buck, definitely outdamaged him, and he basically, I think, like 49, 46'd him. I or was that, I don't even, was that 5 rounds? I don't know. I might be tripping. It doesn't matter. Yeah, no, it was 5 rounds. He 49, 46'd him. Beyond that, before that, Khamzat Chimaev. How did he look against Khamzat Chimaev? You're gonna sit there and tell me that he didn't take Khamzat Chimaev to a draw almost? Now, I won't lie through my teeth and tell you that that for sure was a draw, but you can't argue that that was a draw. You can't argue that Kamaru Usman coming off of a long layoff, up a weight class against the future middleweight champion who has looked extremely dominant except against Usman and Gilbert Burns. And I would argue the version of Khamzat that fought Usman was a lot better than the version of Khamzat that fought Gilbert. You're telling me that guy doesn't belong in the S tier? Guys, he is the favorite to fight Islam Makhachev. I don't mean he's the favorite in that fight against Islam Makhachev, but Vegas right now thinks Kamaru Usman is going to fight for the belt next. Why? I think it's for some of the reasons I said, and I also think yes, it's because the UFC is a for-profit company, and so they want the most profitable matchups, and that's what this is. It's a pound for pound, a former pound for pound number one versus a pound for pound, current pound for pound number one. Both of them very popular. Both of them have been wanting this fight for a long time, or at least Kamaru Usman has. A very easy fight for the UFC to set up. They have the same manager. There's no way either of them decline it. They're both calling for it. So I think he gets the next title shot. I think he has an impressive performance, and then I think he rides into the sunset as an S tier unk. That's my argument. Anyways, moving on to our next unk, we've got Renato Moicano. Money Moik, Money Moik. This is gonna surprise people. I think I'm putting him in the A tier though, and I'm gonna explain myself again. I get it. People aren't gonna understand this one because they're gonna say, "Oh, he's lost his last two. He lost to Beneil Dariush. That's a terrible." And I admit that is a fucking awful loss. But what did he do before that, guys? He finished Jalen Turner and he finished Benoit Saint Denis. And in both of those fights, the finishes were both very impressive. Both of those guys are not contenders. I mean, and Jalen Turner's a prospect. He's definitely a prospect still. Benoit Saint Denis is a straight up contender at this point. If he wins another fight, he could have a title shot or an argument for one at least. Especially if his next fight he's fighting up the rankings a decent amount and he gets another impressive victory. That dude's fighting for a belt. Beyond that, the two losses that Moicano has recently is against Islam Makhachev on short notice. I don't hold that against him. And against Beneil Dariush, who I think is an unfortunate matchup for Moicano. It's unfortunate that he couldn't beat him. I do hold that against him. But I think Moicano is beating any unranked fighter in this division for the most part. I think there is a few prospects who could defeat him, but he's putting belt to ass to a lot of guys in here, and so I think he belongs solidly in the A tier. He has probably declined a lot since his victories against Jalen Turner and Benoit Saint Denis. Those fights, if they had a rematch, probably don't go the same way, but we do have to consider those, and because of those, he belongs in, until he has another loss against someone further down in the rankings, further down in the rankings below Beneil Dariush at least. I think he belongs in the A tier. Moving on to another easy F tier. I'm not gonna lie, I am sorry. And some of the hardcores are gonna be real mad at me, but Renier de Ritter. No, I'm just kidding. So Tim Means, Dirty Bird, RDR's uncle, actually. Tim Means though, I'm gonna keep this one real simple for y'all. He's had one win in his last like 5 or 6. That being against Andre Fialho, who is a literal fucking trash bag, who I think who would not find success in even Bellator, who I think if you sent him to ACA and back in Russia would still be a fucking can. I think he's about he might not even be ranked in Jungle FC back in Brazil, and so that's Tim Means' best win. Besides that, he kind of reminds me of Darren Elkins when I see him fight. He looks old, he looks slow, his chin ain't there anymore. I'm sorry, but Dirty Bird ain't got it no more. Dirty Bird is an F tier unk. Anyways, moving on to our next unk on the list, we got. What are you talking about, guys? You better back the fuck up out of my face. I can't. Okay, I'm sorry. I shouldn't even have tried. But I can't do a Bobby Green accent. A Bobby Green black accent. Um, but Bobby Green, I think he belongs in the C tier. Honestly, um, maybe the B tier because he had that recent win against Lance Gibson Jr. Um, but he got knocked out by Mauricio Ruffy. He got submitted by Patty Pimblett. He got knocked out by Jalen Turner. Yeah, just because he's been finished so many times, I just don't think he has the durability to become the durability or this, I guess, like the defensive capabilities, the survivability, the cockroach aura to be above the C tier. I think offensively he's got A tier unk status, but I think defensively is where he really fails. Um, and beyond that, anyone who's decent that fights him loses or wins. I mean, Murray Ruffy, like I said, Patty Pimblett, like I said, Jalen Turner, like I said. This recent win against Lance Gibson, he literally out auraed Gibson. I think that was a pretty like easy win for Gibson to take, but for some reason, Bobby Green would just emote on Gibson and Gibson would fucking bitch out. And so yeah, he got that win with very easily. Um and I think because of that, we put him in the C tier. I mean, shit, B tier is C tier. Yeah, it's because the strength of comp. I mean, Jim Miller is his other win besides that recently. Not even that recent. Well, semi recent, about last year in 2024. But yeah, I'll keep him in the C tier. I'm not going to over explain Bobby Green. I think he's a journeyman, and as a journeyman who's been able to maintain his journeyman status as he's aged up into his unk status, let's keep him in the C tier. Moving on to the next fighter who actually lost to Bobby Green, and so I think because of that, we have to put him in the tier below him is the D tier. Jim Miller, and I know again this is another popular fighter that people are going to be pissed at me for saying belongs in this tier, but Jim Miller, Damon Jackson, another unk. That's his only win. This guy's only beating other unks and dog shit fighters. Gabriel Benitez, dog shit fighter. Jesse Butler, dog shit fighter. Who is this guy beating? He's losing to Chase Hooper. He's losing to King Green. I think I think he's the quintessential D tier. I also think one of the things that we said that could describe the D tier, fighters who are on the verge of retirement. And I think that is the definition of Jim Miller. Every single interview I talk about, they're asking him, when are you going to retire? He's saying, I don't know. I don't know. I still feel okay. Oh, I think I might retire if I can fight in my hometown or if I can get this record. I think you should retire now, Jim Miller. I think you should retire after your next fight. I think you will retire after your next fight. And I think, again, another basically journeyman who has had even less recent success than Bobby Green, who has lost to Bobby Green, therefore belongs in the D tier, and that's Jim Miller. Moving on, we have this guy is you guys are gonna love this. Ronnie Barcelos. I'm putting him in the A tier. Let me explain. Actually, I don't think anyone's gonna dispute this one. This dude has been unk maxing. He's had maxed out cockroach aura. He's been roach spamming. He's been spamming those takedowns. He's been spamming those leg kicks. He's been getting those dubs. But let me just read you his record recently. He's been on a 4-fight win streak, and before this 4-fight win streak, he lost to Kyler Phillips. I think that's an okay loss to have. Christian Quinones, that's a decent win. Peyton Talbot, that is aged like fine wine. Cody Garbrandt, that's a decent win. Ricky Simone, this guy is not even ranked yet. And he's turning around Prospect and Peyton Talbot, and he's fighting two other crafty young vets in Ricky Simone and Cody Garbrandt, even though they're not 35 plus. They're not unks, but they're crafty vets. That's, I guess, the terminology I would use here. And that's extremely impressive. And I think his next fight will be a ranked opponent potentially, or if not, another prospect where if he wins, then he'll get a ranked opponent. But the fact that Peyton Talbot, who he beat just 2 fights ago in 2025, is now ranked is pretty crazy to me. And so he is an A tier unk fighter. Moving on, Muslim Salikov. Muslim Salikov, I think he's pretty good. He had that win streak, guys, but if he didn't lose to Uros Medic, I could put him much higher. But because of that recent loss against Uros, we got to put him in the C tier. He got sniped by the sniper, but it was a pretty clean knockout. He got clipped, and I think it's the beginning of the end. I honestly think he fluked out Carlos Leal. He hit him with a flukester shot. People are gonna sit there and argue with me that it wasn't because Carlos Leal was just going in there hands down, chin up, going for the knockout. I get what you're saying. I think the stars kind of aligned for him there. Carlos Leal was fighting a fucking retarded game plan. And also he did have Salikov on the fence. I think, if he didn't get knocked out, he was gonna knock out Salikov, which is a pretty cyclical and dumb fuck way of looking at fights. But this ranking is, I could see the argument for a B tier, but we have to put him in the C tier based on the fact that I think in his next fight he'll actually look like he belongs in the D tier. Um, and that might not be the best way of ranking him, but that's the way I'm ranking him. If you disagree, suck me. The next fighter on the list, guys, is none other than Diego Ferreira. And I had trouble ranking him, honestly. I didn't know where to put him, but ultimately I settled on the B tier just because his strength of schedule has been pretty strong. I will say his loss to Grant Dawson is aging pretty poorly. And his loss to Alexander Hernandez hasn't aged at all because Hernandez does not have any activity really. I think he's trying to fix that. He's trying to get more fights. But beating Matus Rebecki the way he did, and beating Michael Johnson, who is also in the B tier, to me is why he belongs in the B tier. I justified putting who was it? I don't even remember below someone else because they had beaten them. It might have been like Bobby Green or it was Jim Miller. Jim Miller below Bobby Green because Bobby Green beat him. It's the same situation here. I can't justify putting Diego Ferreira below Michael Johnson, even though recently Diego Ferreira has been on a bit of a tumble. Beyond that, skill wise, it looks like he has slowed down a little bit in his last 2 fights, but it also still looks like he still got it. So I think he's the quintessential B tier unk. And yeah, and so moving on to the next unk. This is everyone's favorite guy to either make or lose money on in sports betting. Bet the under pro tip, Gerald Meerschaert. And unfortunately, I think at this point in Gerald Meerschaert's career, it's safe to admit that he is in the F tier of unk status. He's on a 4-fight losing streak. The most recent one being against Kyle Dawkins, who was actually cut from the UFC. And I know Kyle Dawkins has had a resurgence, but that's not a good look. Same thing with Michael Alsjachuk, Brad Tavares. Brad Tavares is another unk who could have been on this list if he was older. Um, Again, maybe not an Unk. Brad Tavares is not an Unk, but he's a crafty vet that was able to beat Gerald Mearshart. Renair de Reader, that's a fair loss, I'll say that, but he got bullied by RDR pretty easily. And I do think he's at a point with this 4 fight loss streak where, we could wake up and on UFC roster watch one day on Twitter announcing that Gerald Mearshart's been cut, or we could wake up just him announcing that he doesn't, the fights that he's been offered weren't good, and so he just wants to retire, or he's injured. And with this last injury, he doesn't have it in him anymore, and so he belongs in the F tier. He is to me on the roster in spirit only, just like Court McGee, just like Tim Means. Moving on to our next fighter, we have Josh Emmett. And so let me drag him out from the void. Shout out Demetrius Johnson from the void. Oh, he's fighting in the void. Oh my god. Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett, he's so hard to rank because when I tell you his record, it's gonna sound like a C tier, and he could be, he probably is, but I maybe because I'm a fan of Bro, Josh Emmett belongs in the B tier. And so let me read you his record, and you guys are probably going to disagree with me here, but most recently, lost to Yusuf Zalal, lost to Lauren Murphy, knocked the fuck out of Bryce Mitchell, lost to Ilya Taporia, and lost to Yair Rodriguez. I think all of those losses have aged extremely well, except maybe Yair Rodriguez. And again, that's just another fighter who has no activity, super annoying. Um, But I think he's one of those fighters, and the reason I have to put him in the B tier and not lower is yes, those losses are there, but we have to argue for his potential to win a fight at any moment, which we saw in the Bryce Mitchell fight. We know for a fact that Josh Emmett, if he lands clean on any fighter, he's knocking them out. And I don't think that's leaving him in his old age. I don't think he's ever really relied on his youthful attributes as a fighter too much to get his wins. And I think if you lowered his level of competition to guys who aren't literally in the top 6 to 7, then he would probably be getting wins right now. So beyond that, I think he belongs in this caliber. Do you think he belongs down there with Bobby Green, Muslim Salikov, Cub Swanson? Oh, and that's why I hate the Stephen Thompson. I'm gonna leave him in the C tier, but this is making me rethink Stephen Thompson. Anyways, moving on. Neil Dariush. I know this one is gonna surprise people, but hear me out. Benil Dariush has all the qualities of an A plus tier unk. The only reason you're sitting there questioning me is because of his chin. And I will admit that chin has been exposed in basically every single one of his fights except the Moicano fight recently. Um, and it probably could continue to be exposed. But, but hear me out. I think it's partially the weight cut. So I think this attribute isn't something he can't manage a little bit better. So if he moved up, he could get some crafty vet wins in the welterweight division. And some people are going to disagree with me there, but let's look at his wins. Mateusz Gamrot, Renato Moicano. Let's look at his losses. BSD, Armin Sarukin, Charles Oliveira. So that's 2 out of those 3 losses are in the top 3. One of those losses, Benoit Saint Denis, is either future top 5, but for sure top 10 material right now. And so he has not lost to anyone outside the top 10. And anytime he's had to fight someone who is remotely, you know, close to being outside of the top 10, he wins pretty easily. And so to me, that's why Benil Dariush belongs in the A tier. Moving on to Jared Cannonier. Cannonier. This was another one that was somewhat difficult to rank, but I'm going to just go ahead and say it. He is in the B tier. Let's go over why. Recent wins: Gregory Rodriguez, Marvin Vittori. Both of those wins, like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. One is aging okay to good, which is Gregory Rodriguez. One is aging pretty bad, which is Marvin Vittori. There is an asterisk next to the Marvin Vittori, I guess. I don't want to say win, but the quality of that win, and that's because Marvin Vittori has been dealing with a lot personally as a fighter, which I think is kind of. Don't get me wrong, he's looked the exact same in every fight, and his opponents have just beat the shit out of him. But Um, I don't know. I don't know if he's been in the fight game for real recently, and so I don't know. That's kind of a suspicious. I don't know. I think Marvin Vittori's recent performances can have somewhat of an asterisk beneath them. Looking beyond that, who has he beaten or who has he lost to? Michael Page, I will admit, not the best person to be losing to, but that's an A tier unk right there. So no respect in losing to that guy. And then Kyle Barajo and Nasruddin Imavov, who are both in the top five in the middleweight division. So he's been a perennial, top five middleweight contender. I think at this point he's achieved gatekeeper status. I think he'll continue to gatekeep for a little while longer. I think most of these B tier fighters are gatekeepers in one way, shape, or form. Whether they're gatekeepers of the top five, top 10, or even the top 15 is somewhat debatable. Um, but I do think they're all gatekeepers, and Jared Cannonier included. Moving on to our next fighter, we have the one, the only Neil Magny, the Haitian sensei. Oh my God, he looks like an alien in this graphic. Why does his head look so thin, and with his beard, it looks like his head is floating. Gross. Anyways, let's put him with his brethren, his C tier brethren. Neil Magny, he had that recent loss, I think like about a week and a half ago to Yaroslav Amosov, if that's how you pronounce it, the former Bellator welterweight champion. Before that, though, he was on a two-fight win streak, one against Jake Matthews, one against Elizu Zaleski dos Santos. Before that, had that vicious knockout to Carlos Prates, and that loss to Michael Morales. And so again, we got to focus on the quality of the wins and the quality of the losses here. I think this most recent loss has de-escalated him from true gatekeeper status up here in the B tier to more of like that prospect gatekeeper status. These guys are gatekeeping either contender fights or um, I guess title contender fights, if that makes sense. So you're either fighting to become a contender in the B tier if you beat these guys, or you become a contender straight up. You get the title shot at beating one of these guys, and so or not the title shot, but you enter contendership status by beating someone in the B tier. This you enter prospect status, and I think that's where Neil Magny is at now. I don't think if you beat him, you become a contender anymore. I do think if you beat him, you become a prospect. Um, I also think it's getting difficult to match up Neil Magny because his value to the company is kind of decreasing. Um, he needs to collect a win, I guess, if he wants to stay, if he wants to ever, if not ever, but if he wants to get back to the B tier because he's very close to it, he needs to get another win. And yeah, and so moving on to the next fighter, Justin Gaethje, Garth. So we got Rufus. Shout out Lucas Tracy. We got Rufus here. I'm putting him in the S tier. People aren't going to agree with me because he's lost to what Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira. Beyond that, he's beat Rafael. He's not had the activity that you guys want. This dude's fighting for a belt. I don't care if you think he deserves that title shot or not. He definitely deserves to be in the S tier of unks. He he's always been, I guess, in his unk status, he's been more of a dog than a lot of unks. He's had some short notice fights. I think, for example, against Max Holloway, against Rafael Fiziev, he didn't have to take those fights, but he did. He took those risks. I think he performed pretty well. Maybe not against Max Holloway, but the Dustin Poirier fight is literally the best win of his career. Um, and then after that, the Rafael Fiziev rematch just went to show us that he still belongs in the top five. I don't care what you think about Justin Gaethje. You're not going to tell me he's not a top five featherweight. I mean lightweight. Sorry. And because of that, you're not going to sit here and tell me he's not an S tier unk. Um, And yeah, and so moving on to the final fighter in our tier list, we have War Figgy, Davison Figueiredo, and I'm gonna put him in the A tier. I think he fits comfortably there, guys. Again, his only losses are to the current champ Peter Yan and Corey Sanhagen, at least in the bantamweight division. Beyond that, he beat Cody Garbrandt, Marlon Vera, and Montel Jackson. Those are excellent wins within the division. I do think it's obvious he's slowed down. It's obvious he's not in his prime anymore. He still has his chin, he still has his power, but he's definitely losing some of that durability. That injury to Corey Sandhagen isn't going to be very good foreshadowing for his future prospects. But I think at this point, if you're beating Kafigi, you're well on your way to a title shot. You're definitely considered a contender at that point. You're not just a prospect at that point. Um, and so, yeah, based on his performances, based on his wins and losses, he belongs squarely in the A tier. And so after that, guys, I don't have any more fighters for you. This is the UNC status tier list in the UFC. If you agree, disagree, make sure to comment below. If you think that an UNC was supposed to be in the UNC status tier list, let me know. If you did like the video, make sure to like. If you like all of my videos, make sure to subscribe. I try to post MMA content basically every day, if not every other day. And so I would appreciate it if you subscribe. Goodbye.